Committee will take up bills in the order they're posted outside the hearing room. Our hearing today is your public part of the legislative process. This is your opportunity to express your position on proposed legislation before us today. We do ask that you limit handouts. If you are unable to attend a public hearing and would like your position stated for the record, you may submit your position and any comments using the legislature's website by 12 p.m. the day prior to the hearing. Letters emailed to a senator or staff member will not be part of the permanent record. If you are unable to attend and testify at a public hearing due to a disability, you may use the Nebraska Legislature's website to submit written testimony in lieu of in-person testimony. To better facilitate today's proceedings, I would ask you to follow these procedures. Please turn off your cell phones and other electronic devices. The order of testimony is introducer, proponents, opponents, neutrals, and closing remarks. If you will be testifying, please complete the green form and hand it to the committee clerk when you come up to testify. If you have written materials that you would like to distribute to the committee, please hand them to the page to distribute. We will need 11 copies for all committee members and staff. If you need additional copies, please ask a page to make copies for you now. When you begin to testify, please state and spell both your last and first name for the record. Please be concise. It's my request that you limit your testimony to 5 minutes. We will use the light system, so you'll have 4 minutes on green and then 1 minute on yellow. If it turns red, I will ask you to stop. If your remarks reflected in previous testimony or you would like your position to be known but do not wish to testify, please sign the white form at the back of the room and it will be included in the official record. Please speak directly into the microphone so our transcribers are able to hear your testimony clearly. I will introduce committee staff. To my immediate left is research analyst Charles Hamilton, and to my left at the far end of the table is committee clerk Thomas Weekly. Now I'd ask committee members to introduce themselves, beginning at my far right.
Kathleen Kauth, LD 31, Millard area. And I would like to say happy birthday to my father, whose birthday is tomorrow. He will be 85 and he is watching from Sacramento. So happy birthday, Dad.
Senator Dave Merman, District 34 from Glenville, 8 counties in the southern part of the state.
Brad Von Gillern, Legislative District 4, West Omaha. Happy birthday, Bob.
Lou Ann Lenny. Oh, I'm already. Happy birthday. Yeah.
Happy birthday, Bob. Senator Joni Albright from District 17, Wayne, Thurston, Dakota, portion of Dixon County and Northeast Nebraska. Welcome.
George Dungan, Northeast Lincoln, District 26, and happy birthday.
Our pages for today, if they would stand up, please, is Amelia, who's at UNL, and she's a senior studying political science, and Caitlin, who's also at UNL, and a junior and studying political science. And these young women have worked very hard this year, so we appreciate them very much. Please remember that senators may come and go during our hearing as they may have bills to introduce at other committees. Please refrain from applause or other indications of support or opposition. For our audience, the microphones in the room are not for amplification, but for recording purposes only. Lastly, we use electronic devices to distribute information. Therefore, you may see committee members referencing information on their electronic devices. Be assured that your presence here today and your testimony are important to us and is a critical part of our state government. And with that, we will open on LB 344. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan, and the rest of the Revenue Committee. My name is Christy Armendariz, CHRISTY ARMENDARIZ. I represent District 18 in Omaha. I appear before you today to represent LB 344. LB 344 would set a 5-year cutoff date for claiming the refundable property tax credit. Last year, a delinquent property tax from 1998 was paid and an application was submitted for the income tax credit. County officials researched 25 years of tax district changes to be able to apply this relatively small credit correctly. Essentially, we're trying to encourage you to pay your taxes on time. So this 25-year look back caused a lot of time, effort, money and manual labor. So what we're trying to do is do a 5-year cutoff look back for this property tax credit. I think it was just an oversight in the property tax incentive bill that was passed 2 years ago. So we're just trying to clean that up with a limit on it. Any questions from the committee? I'm available. And I also have John Cannon from NACO behind me if you have more detailed questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Cal.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. The property taxes that are not claimed, where do they go back to? Is that to general fund?
You'll have to ask John for that.
Okay.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are you going to stay to close?
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan, distinguished members of the Revenue Committee. My name is John Cannon, Joncannon. I'm the Executive Director of NACO here to testify in support of LB 344. Thanks to Senator Armendariz for bringing this bill. This is one of those things that, and actually before I get going, I should also say happy Mr. Senator Kalstead. Anyway, the reason that this was brought to us are programmers that work with the County Treasurer's Office. This is a situation where we give a lot of information to the Department of Revenue so that they know how to calculate the refundable income tax credit. LB 1107, you've heard me saying its praises. A good bill, good policy provides direct property tax relief to our citizens. But there is a lot of background work revenue taxpayer. So we build our tax statements around the idea of a tax district with a common levy rate. And that's defined actually in our statutes, 77, I believe it's Nebraska Revised Statute section 77-128, but it's somewhere around there if I'm off. But the tax district is how we build up our tax rolls. These are the areas that have the same overlay of different taxing authorities that comes up with that common levy rate. And by doing that, from year to year, not all tax districts are going to remain the same. They'll have either an annexation will occur, so you'll have someone that was previously not in a city, now is in a city. A school district can expand its borders. There are all sorts of different things that make those tax districts vary from year to year. And so when you get a request going back to 1999 in Box Butte County, in 1998, and at least one other instance that we're aware of, then at that point, we have to go back and as counties and recreate what those tax districts look like, because that's not something that we just generally have on file. Every year, new payments are collected for old statements and tax districts that may or may not be in existence, or at least not according to the boundaries that have been established for those tax districts. And so they have to be recreated for any tax year that's not previously reported. I believe the refundable income tax credit comes from the general fund, but I think we've got some bills that are out there that would establish its own fund as well. With that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Okay, I'm very confused, but anybody else have questions? Sorry, you may have questions. I'm also tired. Does anyone else have questions? We just passed this law. How could you get a break for taxes that were due in 98? I don't understand why we would think we would even do that.
So the bill as written said that you are eligible for a refundable income tax credit for taxes paid in the prior year. It doesn't specify which tax year you're paying for. And so in theory, you could have taxes that are delinquent back a long, long ways. And if I make that payment in tax year 2021, then I am eligible in 2022 to claim that refundable income tax credit for any taxes paid on that parcel.
It says what again? It says prior year.
So
Taxes paid, not taxes due.
it's taxes paid, not taxes due in the prior year. Yes, ma'am.
So could we just change that one word?
We certainly could. I think that there are some people that, for instance, we have the tax delinquency laws, which, in theory, someone could go, they might not have paid their taxes for the prior 3 years, and then you put it up for tax sale and there's a certificate and all that good stuff. And so I think, I don't know. I defer to you, but
Okay, well, we'll
it's a
figure it
possibility.
out.
Yes,
We'll
ma'am.
figure it out because it's definitely not supposed to go way back. That was never anybody's. I know, that was not the legislature's intent.
And you should know, ma'am, more than anyone else.
I do know the intent, because we had an argument about people who prepaid their taxes and they should get double, and that got, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, any other questions from the committee? I did have one question since you're here, but. Okay, well, you're here often, so maybe I'll think of it next time. Thank
Yes,
you
ma'am.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Are there other proponents? Are there any opponents? Anyone want to testify in the neutral position? Senator Armendariz, would you like to close? We haven't, wait, let me see if do we have any letters?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we had one proponent. So you're waiving closing? So that will close the hearing on 344. And we will open the hearing on LB 398. Okay, that's fine. Okay. Mr. Cannon, since you're here, are you tracking the Supreme Court's decision to take up two of Nebraska's? So do you have any ideas when they throw out our law, what we're gonna do?
We have to see what the evening has to say, and depending on what the Supreme Court says, then we'll have to react accordingly. I don't want to guess how they're going to rule on what basis they're going to rule, so if it does get thrown out, then obviously there's some work to do.
If it does get thrown out, there's just no reason to pay your property taxes?
Hopefully we're making that.
This is on the record.
I think there's
I am
work
on
to do
record.
regardless.
I'm sorry.
So I think there's work to do regardless.
Yeah, well, there is work to do regardless, but. Okay, now, so we're not confused. It's Senator Erdman, he's not introducing another bill, is he? Staff lead?
He was in exec, but that's over and done with, but he's just across the hall. But
And he knows we're waiting on him?
yeah, he does. I'll call him.
How many people are here to testify on Senator Erdman's 398? Okay. How many are here to testify on Halloran's 192? Okay. How about 529? Nobody's here to testify on 322, are they?
Who's 322?
So 2 minute late or?
It is our Friday.
When you need to go get me, you get up and go get me. Okay. Because we don't, in meetings, like, look at this constantly. There he is. Yeah. Good afternoon, Senator Erdman.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay. My name is Steve Erdman, Steverdman. I represent District 47. This bill that I'm presenting this afternoon is very similar to ones that I've done in the past. Very simple, straightforward bill. Game and Parks has for years owned property that they don't pay in lieu of tax. And what the goal of this bill is to have Game and Parks pay in lieu of tax on all the property they own, including that property which they bought before 1977. So currently, the statute says that any land purchased by Game and Parks after 1977, they pay in lieu of tax on that as if the land was held privately. Any land purchased or into their ownership before 1977, there's no tax. And case in point, a couple of years ago, well, in fact, it was 2019, in Sioux County, Game and Parks had proposed to buy or take possession of another 1,500 acres of land. The significance of that is this. On one side of the barbed wire fence was land that Game and Parks owned that they don't pay any tax on in lieu of tax. And on the other side of the fence was this 1,500 acres, and they pay in lieu of tax on that. So in November 15th of 19, the County Commissioner Board in Sioux County voted unanimously to be in opposition of Game and Parks taking more land into their possession. Not necessarily because they weren't going to pay tax, because it prevented other people from taking the advantage of land for sale that they could ranch on or add to their operation. And so when we did this study earlier, the several times I've done this before, most of the land that Game and Parks owned is in Dawes County, which is the county seat of Chadron. And so we had contacted the Chadron treasurer, the Dawes County treasurer, and trying to figure out exactly how much land it is that is not being taxed. And I received an email back, and here's what it said. This is what the county treasurer sent me. Attaches a summary of the parcels paid by Game and Parks. And as you can see, the bottom of the report, there are currently 35 parcels paid by the Game and Parks each year in Dawes County. All these parcels are technically in lieu of tax, but instead of getting an arbitrary sum, Game and Parks pays the statements that are generated by the assessor and that are taxable. As I said on the phone, our system does not allow me to generate a list of exempt parcels. However, it was able to generate a list from the assessor's GIS website that lists all the Game and Parks parcels in Dawes County. There are no amounts listed, but you can see that there are 88 parcels that Game and Parks owns in Dawes County. And Dawes County, and because there is only generated 35 parcels that are taxes due, it is our assumption that those 35 counties are in lieu of taxes and 53 are exempt. So basically what happens is Game and Parks doesn't pay in lieu of tax on those 53 parcels. And that number is that in lieu of tax is somewhere between $900,000 and $1 million, somewhere in that range that they don't pay tax on. So basically what happens, and I have every one of those parcels in the back of this folder, and it's not necessary to give it all to you, but I looked through all those, and it appears that they're paying tax on some, and as we know, they're not paying tax on other. So what it does is those people who live in Dawes County, because that's a county that has the most parcels owned by Game and Parks, is they pay more property tax. So the people who live in town, maybe the little widow lady that lives in town or anyone else that lives in town, pays more property tax because Game and Parks does not. And so all this bill does is have them pay tax in lieu of tax on all the property they own, which is I believe a fair way to do that. If they want to continue to own that land and not pay tax, then or continue, they need to pay the tax. They need to raise the price they charge for hunting or fishing or whatever they do on that property to make up the difference. I think it's unfair that they have people paying property tax, paying for the right for somebody else to enjoy the outdoors. And so it's a very straightforward bill. I would think that at some point in time, Game and Parks will cry awful and start doing things right. But I think what's happening with Game and Parks is I have 109 days left in the legislature. 109. They know that. And so they're going to wait me out until I go away so they don't have to do some of these things. But I'm here to tell you it's wrong. And so senators come and go, but state agencies are here forever. And these people in Dawes County and other counties where Game and Parks owns land that they don't pay tax on are paying more than they should. And so basically that's the whole sum of the bill. It's very simple, straightforward. And I would expect at some point in time, Game of Parks needs to confess what they're doing and step up and pay the tax. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? Senator Von Gillern.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Forgive me for not having this information at hand. In lieu of tax, is that tax rate the same as
Yes,
a private property tax holder? Okay.
yes.
So basically we're taking, the way you explained it, if I understood it properly, we've got land that is exempt from tax payments currently that will come on the tax rolls.
Yeah.
If I'm reading the revenue or the fiscal note correctly, that will be an additional expenditure to the state. But then those property taxes will revert back to the counties and the school districts and so on locally. Okay,
Correct.
just want to make sure.
Yeah, Senator Van Gillen, what happened is before 1977, January 1st, any property they owned was exempt from in lieu of tax. Any property that they took possession of after January 1st, 77, they pay tax on. So in the case of the county commissioners in Sioux County, they weren't necessarily opposed that they were gonna pay in lieu of tax. They were thinking it was taking it out of production for agriculture. So that was their reason to be against it. And so they just need to pay the tax, and they will testify and tell you it's going to cost them $900,000 or $1 million. But that 900 or 1,000 was made up of.
All right, Dallas County?
No.
Where's?
No,
Dallas?
Fort Robinson? Yes, yes.
Okay, so it's Fort Robinson and
No,
Omaha.
I'm not intending for them to pay tax on the recreational areas. This is a land that's held similar to what the land is used for. That's right, the picnic that they received near Fort Robinson,
Okay,
19
okay,
is agricultural land that was pasture land,
okay.
and that's what it was.
But you're not, so that would be one of my questions. You're not talking about,
That's not my intent. If that's the way,
I
and
don't
I
know.
don't believe the bill's written that way, but if it is, that's not my intent.
Okay, all right, that's great clarification. Any other questions? Yes, Senator Merman.
Do you know if the federal government pays in lieu of taxes also on land that they own in the
I
state?
do not know that, Senator.
Okay.
I don't.
If I remember correctly, in Clay County, Fish and Wildlife or Pheasants Forever buy land and retire the irrigation on it, and then it ends up being dry land. So I think the taxes are less. I may be wrong on that, but then they end up selling it to the federal government also. So that's another problem that happens in Clay County
Right.
and I think other places also.
This bill says it should be taxed at its highest and best use. That's what this bill
That's good.
says. So that's the intent.
Yeah.
But I don't intend it to collect tax on Fort Robinson or Shadman State Park.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Halsey's a state park too, right? Halsey's a federal or state, Halsey Forest? National, Halsey, okay.
Yeah.
Is Shadron Public Schools, they get any equalization, do you know? Do they get equalization from TIOSA?
You know what? I don't know that I've looked at that. I would assume that they probably don't.
I would assume that too, but I think they do, and I'm wondering if this isn't why.
I tell you what, while they're testifying, I'll
Okay.
look it up.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. First proponent. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan, distinguished members of the Revenue Committee. My name is John Cannon, Joncannon. I'm the Executive Director of NACO here testifying LB 398. First and foremost, I want to thank Senator Erdman. I'm very happy to be supporting a bill of his today. Again, I've known Senator Erdman for a long, long time. I know what his interests are, and he's got the taxpayers' best interests at heart. Certainly, we're happy to be here in support of that. I do want to take a moment to discuss payment in lieu of tax. You can call it PILT, you can call it pilot, why we have it. Generally speaking, we exempt government from having to pay taxes. That's been a hard and fast rule for a long, long time. It seems for some reason, we said it seems odd to have us take money out of this pocket, change it over to this hand and put in money in the other pocket. But then by the same token, there are times when the government is using land in a way that is either competitive with your standard taxpayer, or they're using it in a way which is not typically thought of as their exempt purpose. And so or something that we want to have exempted. But again, the general rule is we don't tax government, and so that's why we have a payment in lieu of tax. And so you can't put a lien against governmental property, for instance, which is one of the features of the property tax. And so we have this payment in lieu of tax. The government says, yes, we agree to have another, a lesser form of government tax us, and they submit to that and they willingly pay it. And I do have to mention, the counties have no beef with Game and Parks. We think they're a great state agency. They do a lot of great things for the good people of the great state of Nebraska. But the issue about PILT and land that's owned by the government is particularly acute out west. It is also in Clay County. You've got the Fish and Wildlife that has some land there as well, Senator Merman. When you're talking about land that's out west, typically when that land is taken off of the tax rolls, it's going to be used either for recreational purposes, which under a highest and best use analysis, that's going to make the value go up quite a bit. Or if you've got land that is encroaching or near the city limits, the highest and best use for that land would be residential purposes. And so, again, going back to what Senator Erdman was saying, someone that lives in town is going to be subsidizing the purchase of land that could have been used for subdivision. So that is the other feature that I certainly appreciate about this bill, is that it does value land at its highest and best use, instead of having this differential, land that was acquired before 1977 is exempt, land acquired after 1977 is at its original use when it went into the program. And so, as Senator Erdman had said, if it was being used for dry land purposes, it's valued at dry forevermore, no matter what it's used at, even if it is a rec use, even if it could be used for residential purposes. And so what that does is it doesn't unnecessarily or artificially restrict the tax base from growing as it would if that federal or state program were not there. The fiscal note that I'll address that just very briefly. That fiscal note represents dollar for dollar property tax relief for the citizens in any county in which that land is held. And so with that, we urge your support of LB 398, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? Hopefully somebody's from Game and Parks. I don't have any questions. Anybody else have questions? Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Tan.
Thank you, ma'am.
Other proponents? Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Timothy McCoy, Timothy McCoy, and I'm the Director of the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission at our agency headquarters located at 2200 North 33rd Street, Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm here testifying in opposition to LB 398, representing the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. The mission of the Game and Parks Commission is stewardship of the state's fish, wildlife, park, and outdoor recreation resources in the best long-term interest of the people in those resources. An important part of that mission is that we work to sustain wildlife, fishing, and park resources that the public can access for recreational opportunities for our citizens and visitors, and that contribute to the quality of life and economy in Nebraska. I'd like to share with you a little more of the history of the Commission's payment in lieu of tax statute. Prior to 1976, as was mentioned, there were no statutes regarding in lieu of tax payments on any lands owned by the Commission, and that is because, and that's based on the Constitution, as was mentioned earlier. The payment in lieu of taxes that were identified were established in 1976 by LB 861 in the legislature, and it was in conjunction with the establishment of the Nebraska Habitat Stamp. The new statute required that the Commission would make payments on in lieu of taxes on any new lands acquired for wildlife management areas commencing January 1 of 1997. Part of the reasoning for that was the Habitat Stamp was created with a purpose for increasing the amount and quality of wildlife habitat in the state, and included acquisition of those new wildlife lands to provide public opportunity for hunting, fishing, and other outdoor recreation. So currently, since when that was originally established, the payments in the initial years were actually identified as just an amount equal to what the seller had paid prior to our acquisition. In 1997, this bill was modified and statute changed to reflect that we would pay the same amount for that land as the assessed value, as if it was in private ownership. And that applies to all those lands that have been acquired since 1977. So right now, we pay an assessed value on those private lands just as they are, and we make those in lieu of tax payments to the counties for that amount each year. Additionally, the way it was written for valuation purposes, the classification of lands was fixed as those at the time of purchase. That means in cases where if we as an agency acquire land that has irrigation on it, it's irrigated land or it's cropland, and we convert those to wildlife habitat, we continue to pay those that play on that land in that original classification. And that I would also mention that because it's focused on acquisitions, it's not just lands that we purchase, any lands that we would accept that are gifted, because we do get donated lands at times, would fall under that. So we will pay in 2020, for 2022 taxes, and this year we'll pay $1,087,000. And that is on 71,156 acres of wildlife lands that were purchased after 1976. At the time the habitat stamp was passed in 1976, we owned 39,435 acres in the state. Current total of lands owned is about 110,500 acres. When we look at our in lieu of tax payments, 10 years ago, we paid about a little over $500,000 a year in payment in lieu of taxes. In the last 10 years, we've increased some acres, and the amount of payments have went up to 111%. So we've been seeing the same thing everybody else has. And since we pay an in lieu of tax, I would also mention for your committee's knowledge, we're not eligible for any of the property tax relief funds because we're not paying taxes, we're paying in lieu of tax. So that habitat stamp was established in law in 1976. And, the in lieu of taxes was really part of the negotiation. I think I wasn't here from what I've heard when they created that habitat stamp with that purpose, part of which was to buy land and that those new lands would be subject to those lands acquired thereafter.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Albright.
Thank you, Chair Linehan, and thank you for being here today to help us understand this. So does it matter if your ground is gifted to you versus if you go out and seek to purchase?
Not for this statute. It's the way it's written is any new wildlife lands acquired.
Okay.
So it is applied to everything that we have acquired since this went into effect.
And is Game and Parks always looking for new habitat to purchase?
Well,
And or do you have a goal that you want to?
we don't have a goal, and the way our process works, we can only purchase land when it's offered to us by a willing seller.
Okay.
We don't go try to.
You don't bid against the farmer next door?
We don't usually we're dealing with somebody who has an interest in selling us the land. We have a pretty long process. Our land acquisition process is, I would say, slow and purposeful.
Mhm.
We'll have our staff do a full site review of anything that's offered. They will make initial recommendations to a lands committee we have of our division leaders. If we get a lot of land offered to us that we do not proceed on because it's not close to another wildlife area, or it's not anything that's what we would call a really unique habitat with unique features.
Mhm.
So we don't just look at it as acquiring land or hunting access. It's really tied to the wildlife conservation value of those lands.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Other questions from the committee? Senator Merman.
So according to statute, you have to pay in lieu of taxes then. Why is it called in lieu of taxes instead of just paying property taxes if it's?
It's called in lieu of taxes because I believe in the Constitution, it says that property of the states and subdivisions shall be exempt from property taxation unless the legislature imposes or authorizes a payment, either a payment of property taxes or an in lieu of tax. And so it's always been identified as in lieu of tax for those public land.
Thank you.
Since we're a state agency.
And another question, you may not know the answer to this, but I think the federal government does pay in lieu of taxes also on some land, or has at least.
Federal government, I know the Fish and Wildlife Service does pay in lieu of tax. I'm not, I think most of the federal agencies do that. Their in lieu of tax rates, I don't know how they're set. And I also know there's been times that they have, their payments aren't always consistent year to year, based on whatever they do in their federal budgeting process.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking, there's large tracts of federal land in Clay County, and I know they have paid in lieu of taxes on it before, and I don't think they always do, but if they do, it's minute compared to what the value of the land actually is.
Yeah, and it's not the same. It's not the same as what we do with our in lieu of tax.
Yeah, I think they pay about $2.50 an acre, where other land is more like $100 an acre. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Are there other questions from the committee? Could you said you had how many acres in 76 or 77?
And 70, yeah, and 70s before it went into play, we had
I'm not familiar with you where I live, and Fort Robinson, was Fort Robinson, that was federal property given to land, excuse me.
Yes, Fort Robinson was federal land that was eventually transferred. As Robinson, we do have some wildlife lands that are around there. One of the parcels that Senator Erdman was referencing is actually just adjacent to the southwest of the fort.
Okay. Is Toadstool Park game parks? That's
No.
State parks
No,
or
that's,
national park?
I believe that is owned by the Forest Service,
Okay, explain what they are.
or they may have established it as a national park. I don't remember. I know it's federal.
That's fine. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Are there other opponents? Are there any other opponents? Is there anyone wanting to testify in the neutral position? Senator Erdman, would you like to close? And let me see if we have any letters here. We have two opponents.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. I looked at the Shadron school system. They received $3.9 million equalization aid.
So that's, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be a wash.
Yeah, it's
frankly.
$3.9 million. So if they'd pay another $1 million, and probably 65% of that goes to the school, it reduces their equalization aid.
Right.
So, you know, you didn't hear Mr. McCoy say anything about why they don't pay taxes on that, or they don't want to pay taxes on before 77. But the point is, I can't differentiate any difference between the land they own on one side of the barbed wire fence by Fort Robinson and the other side. So they willingly pay in lieu of tax because the statute says they do. So let's change the statute so they have to pay in lieu of tax on all the land. But Dawes County happens to be the greatest amount of land they own is in Dawes County. That's a pretty significant drag on your county to take $1 million off the tax rolls. And so those people who live in Shadron and Crawford and those other little communities, they pay more in taxes because Game and Parks does not. That's plain and simple. That's what it is. And so I would ask you to move this on so that we can finally, once and for all, have them take the burden of paying the taxes they should be paying. And irregardless whether the statute says it or not, what's right is right, and it's property tax relief. So I appreciate your time today. Appreciate your questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the committee? I have one, and you don't have to look this up because Game Parks is still in the room, I think. So I would like to know how much the habitat stamp,
Brings in.
yes.
I don't know the answer to that. And I would assume they can tell you what that is.
Yeah, so they
But-
will tell me.
You know, the point is, if they have to pay in lieu of tax on that other land, raise the price of those who use the property, who enjoy it, and let those other people who don't and have to pay property tax have some relief. Simple. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll bring the hearing on LB 398 to a close, and we will open the hearing on Senator Halloran's LB 192. Good afternoon, Senator Halloran. I know. We should trade chairs. Mine is like a high chair.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. Thank you for this hearing. For the record, my name is Senator Steve Halloran, Stevehalloran, and I represent the 33rd Legislative District. Excuse me. Given that LB 192 involves Social Security benefits, I want to preface by thanking the 2022 Revenue Committee members and all of my other colleagues who have joined me in voting for LB 873. That bill phases out the taxation of benefits received by taxpayers under the Federal Social Security Act on their Nebraska individual income tax return. In 2025, our state's tax on Social Security income will be phased out, will be 100% phased out. Thank you, and I feel it is important to emphasize this major policy decision that occurred and how it would tie in with this bill. I introduced LB 192 this session at the request of a constituent. It simply exempts Social Security income when calculating homestead exemption. Such income would be deducted from an applicant's adjusted gross income, which would lower the property tax liability on homesteads for persons who receive Social Security. This ends my testimony on LB 192 and my tradition of being brief. I would be happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability. And I would like to thank you and your committee for allowing me to present this bill. Any questions before?
Are there any, thank you, Senator Halloran. Are there any questions from the committee? Do you believe the fiscal note is accurate?
Do I believe fiscal note's accurate? Do I believe any fiscal note's accurate?
Do you have major concerns about the fiscal?
Well, that's a significant fiscal note, but I think what it tells us is that figure 46 million to 50 million tells us that there are good tax-paying Nebraskans who are frankly being denied the opportunity for homestead exemption because the Social Security is used as a source of income on the criteria, right?
Well, they could probably maybe have some other retirement income that pushes.
It certainly could, but that could be the margins for some not to. And we all know Social Security is not an entitlement. All Nebraskans paid into that from their earnings as they work. So it shouldn't be penalized. They shouldn't be penalized for it in regard to homestead exemption.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator Von Gillen.
On a similar note, and I don't expect you to have the answer to this, but I'd sure love to know what the total, maybe somebody in the committee knows the total value of homestead exemptions in the state, because again, that 46 million just looks like a huge number.
120 million, going up rapidly.
Okay.
I would think it would be interesting if we could have someone from the fiscal office at least to testify on almost every bill to explain their fiscal.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, that would be interesting. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, you gonna stay to close?
Sure.
Okay. Next, excuse me, first proponent.
This.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senators. Doug Kagan, Doug Kagan, Omaha, representing Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom. Many of our elderly members take advantage of the homestead exemption option. However, because of their individual financial circumstances, many find that they do not receive the same percentage of exemption every year, and others do not qualify every year or qualify at all. Because of the skyrocketing valuation increases in residential property and subsequent tax hikes, many depend on homestead exemptions to be able to remain homeowners. Whether or not one considers Social Security an entitlement, understand that individuals receiving several government entitlements have the ability to subtract a portion of their income from eligibility requirements. The same principle should apply to Social Security. Exempting Social Security income when calculating homestead exemptions, deducting it from adjusted gross income, definitely would allow additional individuals to qualify for a homestead exemption and allow those already qualified to receive a higher percentage of exemption. Nebraska is in the process of exempting Social Security income from state taxation, so such income likewise should not count as income for local taxing purposes. Across the nation, Ohio does not count Social Security income as a factor in homestead exemptions. In Georgia, Social Security and specific retirement income are excluded from the calculation of the income threshold. Let's join other states to help keep Nebraska homeowners in their homes. Please advance LB 192 to the full legislature. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kagan. Are there questions from the committee? You say here that, I don't know that much about the homestead. I know how much it costs, but, and I know it's a tiered system. Are there other incomes that we let people not deduct when it comes to homesteading?
Well, there's some welfare programs, they don't count things in your gross income.
Okay, but what about, but military retirement counts and all the other kind of federal retirement benefit? Is there any other retirement benefit that doesn't count?
I can't think of any.
Okay, I just want. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here. Next proponent.
Good afternoon. Chairwoman Linehan, distinguished members of the Revenue Committee. My name is John Cannon, Joncannon. I'm the Executive Director of NACO, here to testify in support of LB 192. Senator Halloran's, got it exactly right. This is the sort of bill that I think is very, very good. We like the homestead exemption program. I will tell you that it is the only time, I've heard assessors tell me this a zillion times, it is the only time that people walk into the assessor's office and that they're happy. The reason it's a good program is it is direct property tax relief for our citizens. And primarily when we first implemented the homestead exemption back in the 70s, what we wanted to do is we wanted to help those people that are going to be on a fixed income. And so typically what we have is a sliding scale for both your income and your valuation requirement. And so you'll have someone that if they make less than I think it's somewhere around $30,000, then they're eligible for 100% exemption. Of course, if they have if they're living in a mansion, they have a value that is greater than the average assessed value for single family residential. We don't want to be paying the property taxes on those, and so therefore there's a sliding scale for any value that's in excess of that average assessed value. And again, I think Warren Buffett is a great Nebraskan, but we don't want to be paying his property taxes for him. He's living in a nice house. He's certainly making a lot of income. That income threshold is something that we wanted to look at people that could be on a fixed income and provide them with that sort of relief. And so if you think about Mel and Gert, they saved up their money back in the 50s. They scripted saved. They paid off their house, and that they bought for the princely sum of $25,000. And that same house today is valued around let's say $300,000 in the Omaha metro area. We don't want to tax them out of their home, especially since they're on a fixed income. Social Security is the definition of that fixed income. And these are the sorts of people that if they're relying on it, that's the target audience for the people that we want to not tax out of their homes. And so We think it's a great program. We think that anything that allows more people to take advantage of a direct property tax relief program is a good thing, especially if we have more voters that are happy when they come out of the assessor's office. And to answer your question, Senator Linehan, and maybe you're not asking me, but I'll pick up on it anyway. We do add back railroad retirement income and any net operating carry forward from a net operating loss. And then there's anything that adjusts Nebraska AGI over the federal AGI. We add that back for income purposes. So anyway, we would urge your support of LB 192, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay. Are there questions from the committee? Do you think this fiscal note is fairly accurate?
I don't know. I saw the number and I thought that's an awfully big number. It would be surprising that it's almost half of what we're currently paying out in homestead exemptions.
Yeah, because I would expect that a lot of people over 65 are already on homestead exemption.
Yes, ma'am.
Because it is about 120 million now, right? Or it's going to be in the new budget.
It was 112 million for tax year 2021, and it's probably going to projections would have it right around 120 million dollars.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Next proponent.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Dennis Schleiss. It's DENNISSCHLEI. I family live in Morton Meadows at Omaha, Nebraska. We do not get a homestead exemption. Excuse me, we do get a homestead exemption, but with our medical bills and the skyrocketing property taxes on our humble home, it is getting difficult for my wife and I to remain in our home. Several elderly neighbors in Morton Meadows had to sell their homes because of taxes. Because I'm already told, like, we do not want to be apartment dwellers ourselves. Please vote yes on LB 192. Every little bit of a break helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meadows. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Are there other proponents? Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Are there any opponents? Is there anyone that wants to testify in a neutral position? Senator Halloran, would you like to close?
Thank you, Chairwoman. For the well-being of those that are on fixed income and are currently having Social Security used as a means to kind of limit their ability to attain homestead exemption. That, and for the well-being of those who work in the assessor's office, I'd like to see more smiling faces come into this. With that, I'd close unless you have additional questions.
Okay, we did have one letter, a proponent. And with that, thank you, Senator Halloran. We'll close the hearing on LB 192.
Thank you all.
And we will open the hearing on LB 529. Here he comes. Well, no. He's closing. Okay. No, we'll talk. Yeah. Oh, because it has that one that was really screwy, right? 30 seconds.
Yep, that's fine. You don't want to miss my opening. It's amazing.
No, I don't.
Practicing all week.
Welcome, Senator Hansen.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Ben Hansen. That's BenHansen, and I represent Legislative District 16. Today, I'm here to make changes to what many call truth in taxation. This came from legislation passed in 2021 with full support of the legislature. Last year was the first year to implement the requirement for certain political subdivisions to send out a postcard and hold a joint public hearing if they're looking to increase their property tax request more than the real growth and allowable growth percentages. LB 529, as much as it pains me to say this, is a simple cleanup bill for this process. My office received a great number of phone calls and emails about the pink postcards last year, the majority of it being positive. Political subdivisions often find that very few people, if any, attend the hearings they conduct while constructing their annual budgets. I was on the city council for Blair, and anybody who's been involved, like I know Senator Albright and others have been involved in city or county government, you have this hearing to talk about the budget and like 2 people show up. And so I always remember the mayor telling me, unless their toilets aren't flushing or their water isn't running, you're not gonna hear from them a lot of times. So there were questions and doubts as to if this would improve civic engagement like it was intended to do, or there would continue to be a lack of interest by the public. Well, we were surprised. I know I was. With the joint public hearings last year, over 1,600 people showed up across the state, averaging 41 individuals per hearing. Several had over hundreds of people from the community, packing rooms and requiring overflow locations. Averaging 41 per hearing is actually very good when you consider some out in western Nebraska maybe had like 5, and some like Sarpy County I think had like 300. While the concerned citizens were appreciative, there were some hiccups in the outworking of the new law as counties, cities, school districts, and community colleges learned the specific deadlines, procedures, and processes. The public attending the hearings also had a lot to consider as they gained further explanation and understanding on how the budget is written, what levies mean, and how valuations play a part in tax increases. Since the intention of the legislation was successful, though, I didn't want to bring too many changes this year. One important aspect of LB 529 that goes a little bit beyond minor changes is the issue of school bonds. I brought this at the request of the political subdivisions. Currently, school bonds are not included in the property tax request and are treated separately. Because it wasn't specified in truth and taxation, this caused some confusion last year. I have worked with the schools to bring language that clarifies that school bonds are to be excluded. The amendment I have provided is in response to public comments. It confirms that newspaper notices would still be included and makes sure that the budget is easily accessible on political subdivision's website. We're trying to figure out the role that newspapers would play, and we decided that is a positive role, and so we decided to keep that back into the bill. Other changes make the timeline more accommodating, requires an elected member to be present, and gives further reporting guidelines so we can track the effectiveness of the hearings. 40 counties out of the 93 held a joint public hearing, and I appreciate all the work of the county clerk's office from each county. The political subdivisions also work to give presentations and create an open line of communication with constituents. I trust the process will be improved by LB 529 and ask that you support moving it to general file. With that, I want to thank you for your time and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Albright.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. I see you have an amendment. Do you think that this is feasible for all counties to be able to do this? Or are they currently doing it?
Are you talking about the newspaper portion?
No, there's an amendment that says each participating political subdivision shall also maintain an easily accessible web page on the subdivision's website that contains the subdivision's proposed budget. Do you think all 93 counties have a website?
No, from my understanding, they don't. And I think the requirement that we have is the ones that are above 10,000.
Above 10,000.
A population of 10,000. Maybe we didn't specify enough in the amendment.
Okay.
I think that was one of the things I heard also from the political subdivisions about that.
Okay.
That we can kind of figure out.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Senator Albright. Senator Van Gillen.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Could you clarify, I'm sorry, when you were talking about the school bonds, so it was in before, now it's out, or it's out and now it's in? Could you run that?
There was a little
one more time,
confusion
please?
on like where they would put them in because the pink postcard we'll talk about last year's tax asking and then the current years. And so some included it in the previous 1 year and some didn't. And also when one ends, that affects how the next year is going to be. So that created a lot of confusion among people and among the political subdivisions. I'm sure somebody behind me can answer that a little bit better, but from my understanding, that's where it came from.
So it doesn't change the reporting requirement with regards to school bonds. It's just how it's indicated on the notice.
From my understanding, yes. We're
Okay.
trying to keep it more even. So last year's and this year's are they're similar, right? They're not including it 1 year and not including it the
Okay,
other.
with you now.
That
Thank
threw
you.
off the numbers a little bit.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator Van Gillern. Are there other questions? I would think you would want to include the bonding because valuations, I mean, if it's bonding, they're paying off, valuations go up, the tax for the bond should go down, I would think.
You can ask somebody behind me just to make sure.
All right.
I don't want to give you the wrong.
Okay,
the
no,
wrong
no,
idea.
that's fine. Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You'll stay to close?
Yes.
Okay. Proponents. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairwoman, good afternoon. Chairwoman Linehan, distinguished members of the Revenue Committee, my name is John Cannon, Joncannon. I'm the Executive Director of NACO here testifying in support of LB 529. I certainly have to thank Senator Hansen. Over the summer, we met with him probably 3 or 4 times to work through a number of issues that we had with the implementation of the bill, even in its conceptual phases when we were working at the county level, and then also after we had the joint public hearings last year. And I think that the fruit of those discussions is reflected in this bill, and we're certainly very appreciative that we have the opportunity to discuss it. I do want to talk about the school bond portion of it that we had talked about. One of the reasons that we wanted to account for the school bonds differently is because we already account for school bonds as their own separate authority on the property tax statement. And that's by law that we have to account separately for school bonds. And because of that, it creates actually a whole host of issues as far as the actual program, making sure it displays correctly on the pink postcard or green postcard if you're in Douglas County. And then the other thing is with school bonds in particular, and I don't want to steal the thunder from my friends at NASB, but with school bonds in particular, because that's such a kind of a large number of people have already voted on it. They're usually aware of that. And when you include school bond, if you have a school bond that's let me think this through, that's in the prior year, and then the next year it's out, that's going to give a humongous cushion for that school district because their property tax request in the prior year that includes that school bond is going to be so high. And then once you remove that school bond, they have that cushion to go up because all we're talking about is the property tax request, right? And then obviously it works the opposite way, in the opposite direction as well, where if you did not have a school bond, all of a sudden you're going to be exceeding a property tax request and you have to have a joint public hearing for something that you've already had a vote of the people on, typically. So that's the reason that we wanted to account for the school bonds in that manner. Again, primarily because of the programming issue as far as how we display it on the property tax statement and how it translates to the assessor's office. We did want to expand the time for hearings. One of the complaints that we received, not a complaint really, one of the comments that we received is that a lot of people would show up at these hearings. I attended a couple of them myself, and people would say, well, when's the budget hearing? Well, the budget hearing was last week. And we do want to be able to drive people to the budget hearings because that is where their voice is going to have the most bang for its buck. And so by expanding that time frame, we're able to catch more people on that net of being able to get them to the budget hearing. Certainly, again, want to thank Senator Hansen for working with us proactively on bringing this bill. And I would urge you moving this onto the floor, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? So you're putting bonds in or you're taking bonds out?
We would be taking bonds out.
Okay. All right, and somebody from the school board association's here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I believe so. I don't want to speak for him.
Okay. Well, we can always ask them. Yes, I see them. Okay, are there any other questions? Yes, Senator Albright.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. On page 3, it's down on line 28. We're talking about a presence of a quorum or the participation of elected officials at the joint public hearings does not violate the Open Meetings Act. Is that one of the 3 budget hearings? Are they referring, do you know if that's what they're referring to?
No, ma'am. It's referring to that joint public hearing that we have. We had asked for that, actually. There were a number of county boards that they would either call me or they texted or they emailed and they said, hey, all of us want to attend the joint public hearing just to see what's going on, hear what everyone has to say. And I said, don't do it, because if you're there, you've got a quorum of the board, you have to provide reasonable advance public notice because it could be considered something that falls under the Open Meetings Act. And so if you're on a 7-member board, we said send no more than 3. If you're on a 5-member board, we said send no more than 2. And if you happen to have a 3-member board, which we've got a lot of them in Nebraska, we said do not send more than 1 county board member, because otherwise you've got to provide notice of this under the Open Meetings Act.
So you're not letting people know that you're having the hearing?
No, so
You don't advertise that you're having the hearing?
So the pink postcard plus the notice that we put in the paper is telling everybody, here's where the joint public hearing is going to be. What we didn't want to do is we didn't want to have a quorum of, in the county's case, a quorum of the county board show up, because that could be considered a meeting of the county board. And this was not.
Do they take minutes there? Do they take any comments or?
Under the
just
joint,
introduce it? Yeah.
under the joint public hearing, ma'am, they do not. It's a joint public hearing. It wasn't intended to be something that fell under the Open Meetings Act. And that was through a lot of conversation that we had back and forth with Senator Hansen's office. We wanted to make sure, however, that and Senator Hansen, I think, addressed this. We want to make sure that at least one elected official is there to hear, and they can report back to everyone else on the governing board. And so that's why this provision and that other provision are in there. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Other questions? Okay. Have you got a copy of the bill in front of you?
Yes, ma'am.
So on the last page, 8, line 11 through 13, the amount of each participating political subdivision seeks to increase its property tax request in excess of allowable growth rate. What's the allowable growth rate?
So the allowable growth percentage is, it's going to be, I believe it's either 2 or 3% plus whatever their growth had been. We have a definition of growth that is essentially any new construction, any property that's put into TIF, that would be the excess valuation in TIF. Those sorts of things, any increase that you have in value because of a change in land use, for instance, would be considered growth. And so that allowable growth percentage, that's the number, that's the threshold that tells you whether or not you have to hold.
To do it.
Yes, ma'am.
So why is it underlined? That's what I'm questioning. If that's already what we're doing, why is it in here and underlined?
Because this is I believe this is for the portion of the report that the clerk has to send to each of the political subdivisions, and essentially what it does is it's accounting for everything that said here's why everyone showed up at the joint public hearing.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next proponent.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman, Linehan, and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Michael Dwyer, Micheal Dwyer, and I'm here to testify in support of LB 529. I'm a retired business owner, a taxpayer, a volunteer firefighter, chairman of the Arlington Planning Commission, and I was a 12-year member of the Arlington School Board, serving 2 years as president. I hope my testimony will offer many of those perspectives and will both reiterate the importance of 2021's LB 644 and the importance of the largely technical LB 529. Thank you, Senator Hansen, again for introducing this. Is particularly in our area of the world, has been incredibly important. My reaction, and I think the reaction of so many Nebraskans when we received our now famous pink postcard, was, wow, I didn't know it was going to be that much. That prompted approximately 135 of my best friends and neighbors to attend our county's joint public hearing. The hearing lasted well over 2 hours. And while the information was enlightening and informative, the date of the hearing was September 26th, with only a few days until the budgets were due. In addition, there were no school board members at the hearing. Truth in Taxation has prompted many of us to attend regular board meetings and to participate in the budget process, which is a good thing. As a board member, I felt tremendous pressure to do the right thing for kids. However, in the light of 644, board members must now stand in the gap between those well-meaning groups of administrators, teachers, parents, and kids, while honoring the resources of local taxpayers that they are elected to represent. LB 529 would offer two specific things that will greatly improve the process. First, move the date of the joint public hearing up, lengthening the time the boards have to actually make changes. The 5 days that Arlington had was simply not enough. While some boards responded well, some hid behind, we just don't have enough time. Finally, as I mentioned, there weren't any school boards in attendance at our joint public hearing. Board members, at least one, need to hear what their constituents are saying at these meetings. Knowing that a board must justify the dollars spent and eliminating the excuse that we don't have enough time to change it has the potential to really impact taxes. I would encourage your support for LB 529, and I would welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Senator Albright.
Thank you, Chair Linehan, and thank you for being here, Mr. Dwyer. That's probably the biggest concern that I heard was the timing of all of it.
Yeah.
Because, and this is mentioned in the bill, this was changed so that we have enough time. Do you feel?
I do. It's still tight.
Right.
From being on that side of the world, it's still tight. But it does widen it enough. We're always stuck between that rock and a hard place of when valuations are released, when we can actually set the budget, and when on the other side, when it's due. I have in my written testimony, I think when I was a sort of a young pup on the board, I was always told that, well, we can't really set our budget until we know how much money we have to spend.
Exactly.
For me, that turns the entire budget process on its head. At the very least, the interest that the original bill, the pink postcard, generated has been really good. I just see a lot more people, including me, who wasn't as responsible as I should have been when I left the board. It encourages us to go to the board meetings, be involved in the process as a partner, not just a loud voice banging on the table, but as a partner.
Right.
And I think that's a really good thing. Whether or not these dates are perfect, not sure of that because they're still tight, but there's no question it expanded and it'll be better.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there other questions in the committee? When you were on the board, how long ago were you on the board?
I left the board in 2016, give or take.
So doesn't this schools, don't they usually get a preliminary valuation somewhere, not so late, like maybe, like we've all gotten our preliminary valuation,
Yeah.
so.
Honestly, Senator, I don't remember getting preliminary evaluations in any official form. Were there a conversation about, hey, we think this is where this is going to come in? Certainly, and we could have some idea of what we probably had. But it was my understanding on August 20th, we didn't really know for sure what that was going to be. I know that our supers, all the ones that I worked for, usually made a sort of an informal call to the county offices and, hey, what's this going to look like? And got some answer, but that wasn't official. And arguably it was difficult for the board to actually do too much until they had that official announcement or reading. Sorry, I don't know the actual.
Anyway, it takes them so long if they send them out, they send them out to the homeowner. Oh, because people have time to contest the valuations.
Yes.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So Linehan, members of the committee, my name is Lynn Rex, Lynnrex, representing the League of Nebraska Municipalities. We're here today supporting this measure. I do want to indicate, though, I just saw the amendment, and we would have real concerns about the change in the amendment on page 5 after the period on line 29, which as
Second, Lynn, just
okay, this is the amendment, page 5, line 29, after the period, if I understand this correctly from just a quick review of the amendment a few minutes ago, each political subdivision shall also maintain an easily accessible website that contains the subdivision's proposed budget. Of the 528 municipalities in the state, there are a lot of them that don't have websites.
I think he clarified by saying they had.
Oh,
to have-
did he? I'm
I
sorry.
think he did. They had to have 10,000 people.
Oh,
It's not.
I don't
It's-
see that in the
It's
bill.
not in-
I think it's in the other part, but we'll clarify.
Oh, okay. Yes, just to make sure that,
Okay.
I mean, we're looking forward to the time when there's broadband all across the state. That'd be great. And those kinds of issues wouldn't be a concern, but we're not there yet. So that is really problematic. With that, and just an answer to some of the questions, and John Cannon is certainly the expert, I am not, which is why I was visiting with him just a few seconds ago, which is basically, you get your preliminary valuation for your home, for example, and sometime in April, May. You have the right to protest then through June 30th, and then through July, and he has certain dates that then kick in for the hearings, for the counties to hold the hearings for those of us that choose to protest or not. So the timeframe is extremely tight. August 20th is when political subdivisions then get their, here's your certified assessed valuation. And then that clock goes pretty fast in terms of what you can do and how you do it. So in any event, we thank Senator Hansen for visiting with us. We do hope that at some point, I do think one of the major issues we discussed with him, and I realize at this time he's not willing to make the change, but having the valuation issue on that card caused, at least in Lancaster County, nothing but confusion. People thought they were there to protest their valuations. Well, that time, of course, had long passed. I think I was really gratified to hear the individual before me testify that, really underscores the need to attend the most important hearing, which is your budget meeting. That's the budget meeting. So in any event, we appreciate the minor adjustments that he has given. We certainly hope that the language on the websites will be stricken or something on it that would be most helpful. For example, all first-class cities, certainly cities of the first class have websites, but once you get down to the second-class cities and villages, it's a different scenario. So in any event, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? I don't see any.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
Are there other proposals?
Good afternoon, Senator Linehan, members of the committee. Colby Coash, C-O-L-B-Y, C-O-A-S-H. I represent the Association of School Boards. My testimony also reflects the proponents of NERCSA, the Rural Schools Association. With regard to the amendment that was presented, we haven't had a chance to really digest that, so I don't have, my comments today are on the green copy of the bill. But I know Senator Hansen has indicated his willingness to work with us. We probably would have some of the same concerns Ms. Rex did about maybe some smaller schools, but we're here today because Senator Hansen has been gracious with his time and effort working with us on this, right? So as he stated last year during LB 644, we need to see how this goes. And I know he attended several of these postcard meetings, as we call them, and I was at a bunch, our whole office was, and we were able to gather a lot of feedback from those meetings. And shortly after that, Senator Hansen started to bring the political subdivisions together to talk about what did we see, what kind of changes, what kind of adjustments needed to be made to make the process work more clear, not just for the political subdivisions, but for the taxpayers who come in to talk to them. And so LB 529 starts us down that road. We appreciate some of the clarifications in this bill. We took calls from school board members saying, now, can we all go to these? And, at the time, our advice was, if you all went, yeah, it's a quorum. And this isn't an open meeting. This is a joint forum. So, send one, and so a lot of them did. Of course, the presentation is typically done by somebody who can speak more correctly about the budget. So those are usually finance managers, a lot of times superintendents, but we certainly appreciate wanting to have an elected official there, have no problem with that. So we're supporting the bill and the clarification that if they all showed up, it's not an open meeting, right? And that makes sense, right? Because there's no decisions being made. There's no votes being taken at these forums. This is a chance for the public to hear what the political subdivisions are doing. And so I think it is important that the elected officials are paying attention and listening to that. And this opens that door a little bit in that regard. So we appreciate that clarification. The bonding was brought up earlier. I think Mr. Ken did a good job of talking about that, and Senator Hansen as well. But what happened last year was it was very confusing for districts. And I can tell you across the state, some districts were including bonds as part of their calculation that they sent to the counties. Some were not. And it was confusing because if you called certain entities, you would get two different answers, right? And so there was some, I'll call it just a disagreement between folks like the auditor's office, the state auditor, NDE, whether or not the law required that to be part of your calculation. And so Senator Hansen worked with us, and this clarification by removing it made sense for the reasons that, from our perspective, that he illustrated. Those were voted on by the people and other things like that. So we appreciate the changes. We look forward to another round of these while Senator Hansen's still in the body, so we can give any more feedbacks how it goes this year. We understand it's a process, and not to speak for Senator Hansen, but he's always been willing to sit down with us, and we anticipate that happening after another year and seeing what kind of changes can be made, if any, to make this process more user-friendly for the taxpayer and what they see, what they hear when they go to these meetings, and the responsibilities of the political subdivisions when they participate. I'll end it with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? I'm kind of shocked there would be any meeting where at least one board member didn't go. I guess when we pass these bills, we assume that a representative would be an elected representative. Maybe that needs to be clarified in the bill. That all that, or
We agree. If
Needs to be
somebody
elected person.
who's been on the ballot should be listening
Yeah.
to the testimony of the
Right.
and to the, certainly I didn't go to all of them, but there were elected officials at all the ones that I attended. So
I get that we vote for bonds, but we don't vote for a levy to pay that bond off. We just vote for the indebtedness, don't we?
I think, yes.
So they can move that bond levy up and down.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I think most bonds are set together, right? It's like, here's the amount of bond, here's the levy that's going to get us there. And so those.
Yeah, but if the
typically
levy
don't
stays the
change.
same, it's the same old thing.
Correct.
You pass a bond, you say it's going to take 2 cents, a levy of 2, whatever, or 3 cents. But then valuations go up, that it's going to generate more income.
Right. And the debt doesn't change. I mean,
Yeah,
the
the
amount-
debt
the-
doesn't
the-
change.
Correct.
I don't know, I'm concerned about the idea that we leave the bonding up, but maybe nobody else, I don't know. Anyway, anybody else have any questions? All right, thank you very much. Are there other proponents? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Jessica Shelburne, JESSICA, I'm the State Director of Americans for Prosperity. My testimony today is going to be very brief. I think all the previous testifiers have covered a lot of what I wanted to say. We knew that we were going to have hiccups when 644 was implemented last year. I think there's been a lot of good feedback. The one thing that I would say, in having worked with Senator Hansen from the beginning on the Truth in Taxation bill, was we wanted to get the public more involved. We wanted them to have a greater say. And I think back to the 644 hearings when everyone was talking about, well, they all have budget meetings. Well, as the taxpayer, you don't always have time to go to all of those. So this narrowed it down to those top 4 property taxing authorities to be in one place to make their argument and to listen to the people. And I think that the turnout was a lot higher than a lot of us expected last year, which is a great thing. And having those individuals taking a more active role and then going to the budget hearings is good. The timeline that we had to work with when we were initially trying to set this up is very tight. So in this in LB 529 moving up that timeline so that there's more time for those political subdivisions to make adjustments to the budget is a good thing. Like you, Senator Linehan, I do have a couple of concerns with keeping the bonding off because that still affects what the taxpayer is paying. So I do have some concerns with that. But other than that, we think LB 529 is overall a good step in kind of tightening up and cleaning up truth in taxation and being a win for the political subdivisions and, more importantly, the taxpayer.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? On LB 103, do you remember LB 103 that came?
Vaguely.
Are they still doing those meetings? So they do the budget meeting, is that where they set the levy too? I'm getting lots of nuts.
I believe so, yes.
So if they are having to increase the levy from where it automatically drops, they have to have the 103 hearing, they're just doing it at the same time? Is that what they're doing?
I believe so, but I'm not the best person to ask.
Okay, all right, that's fine. I'm getting this behind me, so I think that's what's going on. Okay, any other questions in the committee? Thank you very much for being here. Any other proponents? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Senator Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee, Nicole Fox, NICOLE-FOX, representing the Platt Institute, and I'm here in support today of LB 529. Platt Institute was a strong supporter, as you all know, of LB 644, passed by legislature in 2021, which established a postcard notification and joint public hearing process for the identified subdivisions wishing to capture additional property tax revenues resulting from increased property valuations and spending levels beyond that of the prior years if the level of revenue exceeded real growth plus 2%. It bridged the honesty gap, and it provided for long overdue transparency in how property taxes are levied. No longer could elected officials in political subdivisions not raise a levy rate and claim they weren't increasing taxes. Instead, subdivisions had to print on a postcard the increased tax dollars to be collected compared to the previous tax year. The first round of postcard notifications, as we all know, occurred last fall, and we were happy to advocate for citizen engagement and participation. Nebraskans were definitely hungry for more information. We held an educational session up in Norfolk and had a packed house at the community college there. We created a landing page for people to come to our website and learn more about the hearings, the process, what to expect. And so with that feedback, we decided to continue updating our landing page as well as increase our outreach to 5 events next year for 2023. We couldn't monitor all of the hearings, of course, across the state, but we were able to monitor some, and we, of course, received feedback from several attendees. We heard stories of packed rooms, overflow rooms, people standing in the halls waiting to speak. Some counties had 100, 200, and even 300 people show up at them. Knowing it was the first year, like many said, we knew that there would be, the process would probably need some tweaking, and that's why LB 529 is before us today. Some key things that we recognized that have been also reflected in some of the testimony, and we received it from attendees as well, as issues as far as the bonds. Because as I understand it, some of the postcards, maybe, the first tax year, it was with or without the bond. But then the next year, so it wasn't consistent year to year, whether the bonds were included. So I guess for us, the biggest thing is the consistency of whether you're going to include those bonds or not. Also, it's been brought up the presence of elected officials, because we had heard that, in some counties that it was told to them to not have elected officials there because of the concern about the Open Meetings Act. But it's our understanding that if they're not taking any votes on any measures, that it's not considered, conduction of business. So we would say, at least one elected official be there. And we understand for some of the schools and larger cities that maybe they do want to send a finance director just because some of it is complicated. But definitely we like the clarification that there needs to be an elected official there. Obviously, we agree with the timing of the postcards, that more time was needed between the completion of the hearings and the budget. And then as far as the posting of the budget, and we're happy to work on language with Senator Hansen, because we had kind of brought this to our attention, and I think it's just because we're familiar with it because of some of the work we try and do. There were a lot of people that showed up at these hearings and they were hoping to have had, copies of budgets. And we understand that if there's a hearing with 300 people, and especially like City of Omaha, where their budget is, it's a packet essentially, then it might be hard to do that. But what our suggestion would be is, even if you're talking about a political subdivision that doesn't have a website, but maybe somehow on the county website where they have to post at least, the notice of the joint public hearing, some sort of link or something that could be downloaded or accessed like a PDF, so that somebody could go and just at least, take a preliminary look at the budget before they attend the hearing. So that's what we would advocate for. And we definitely were in favor of the reporting requirement, just because we think that's important to have that information for the making of future policy decisions. So with that, I conclude my testimony. We thank Senator Hansen for his efforts to improve an understanding of how decision-making at the local level affects property taxes, and just being diligent on promoting that taxpayer engagement. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are there other proponents? Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Any opponents? Anyone testifying in the neutral position?
Good afternoon, Senator Linehan, members of the committee. My name is Dennis DeRosset, DENNIS, DEROSSETT. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Press Association. We represent all newspapers across Nebraska. And I'm proud to include that this 2023 is our 150th anniversary of our association. I'm here to testify today in a neutral capacity on LB 529. Our initial concerns with 529 was the elimination of the print notice requirement for the public hearings. We want to thank Senator Hansen, his staff, and the government entities for listening to our concerns, negotiating in good faith, and now amending the bill to reinstate that stricken language that would have removed the notice. For a quick bit of history, when 644 was filed, this requirement was not in the bill. And through negotiations, there was an amendment AM 1114, that was filed to specifically include a print notice, and it passed unanimously on select file, 41-0. I think that speaks well for the importance of the print notice, as well as for the intent for this to be in the statute. I'd also like to add that since last year's bill, all notices are required after print to be uploaded to a statewide website, which is www.nepublicnotices.com. This is at no cost to government. This has been in operation since June 1st of 2021. As of last October, all notices are now required to be uploaded. It's mandatory upload law at no cost to government. And right now there are approximately 245,000 notices on the site, fully searchable, free access. So we think that having an independent third party for the notice, in addition to the postcard notice, is important, because the notice, the print notice certifies the notice. It also archives the notice and archives that this actually took place. So we want to, again, thank Senator Hansen and his staff for keeping this in the bill. And thank you to this committee, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, sir. Any questions from the committee?
Yes.
Senator Van Gillen.
Thank you for your testimony. This may seem like a silly question. The term print and the term circulated newspaper, which I'm reading in the line here, truly indicates ink on paper that is distributed manually, because that's no longer my understanding of the definition of a newspaper.
Well, the print notice on paper is the basis for, the legal basis for a notice. So you can't really hack a printed newspaper. So that's the basis for the legal notice. That then is augmented by the notices being on the websites, the e-editions, mobile sites, and on the statewide website. But when it comes down to it, the actual verification of a notice was that it was actually printed in the newspaper.
Okay.
Yes.
So so you're giving clarity to me with regards to how statutes currently define that. I guess my question is, are those statutes still current with what we now know the modern definition of the circulation of a newspaper to be, which may or may be different than that?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm getting off track here.
Well, it's a fair question, but I think one of the keys is it's an independent third party. And this has been the tradition for going back actually centuries, that since public notices have first been, put into place. And again, we were, as circulations, the print circulation declined because newspapers have long been defined by the last 5 letters, paper. And so that still is the part that serves as the basis, but the audience has expanded to include the digital, the websites, and now the statewide website. So while the actual print copies may have reduced, the actual audience for any story, any notice is much, much larger.
Okay.
But the key is it appeared in print.
Okay.
And again, it's been proven over and over, there's, as a legal process, that being printed, and you've got the affidavit, it's certified, it's archived. I mean, we still get requests for something that was actually, printed 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And sometimes, not county officials, but elected officials come to the newspaper for a verified archive copy of that for some type of proceeding.
And forgive me for I'm not trying to batter. I want to make it stands the test as we move forward. If, for example, the local newspaper chose to not to go to a completely digital distribution, as long as they printed one archive copy with the statute.
That is that change from no print to digital is a big question that we're looking at now.
Okay.
And it's not, it's in front of us. A discussion on the answer yet, but there are publications that have recently left print and went all to
Hence my
digital.
question and concern.
The question then is, what's different from putting it on one website versus another website? And that's why I think just saying, putting them on like a county website, it could be there one fashion one day, it could be a different fashion the next day. And the key to a legal notice is that, it is a true permanent record fact that this happened. And this was filed not only for legal entities, but also courts.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Senator Van Gillern. Sarah Albright.
Thank you, Chair Linehan, and I appreciate you being here to talk about that, because in piggybacking off of your questions, in the big cities, everybody thinks websites is where you go. But where we live, in the other 90 counties, we rely on our newspapers to get us the information. And some of these class cities that are less than 10,000 probably don't have access or the ability to have a web page set up. So we appreciate the newspaper. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Any other questions? So this statewide collection, that's a new law that we passed, or?
Last year in LB 840, sponsored by Senator Brewer, there was a rate increase for public notice, the first rate increase in 25 years. And over a 2-year period, it was actually the line goes from 45 cents to 50 cents a line. So 3 cents one year, 2 cents the next year. But it mandates that every notice after it appears in print must then be uploaded by that newspaper to the statewide website.
And it's this state-run website.
No, this is established, run by the, again, independent third party, the newspapers of Nebraska. So we've fully funded it. We monitor it for compliance, but it's at no cost to the government.
And the search engine, if I go to it and I want Beatrice, Nebraska, or gauge count?
It's search, in fact, I would encourage you to look at it because it searches by newspaper, by county, by notice, by date range. It's pretty good.
Okay, all right. Are there any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Appreciate it.
Are there other, where's neutral, right? Neutral? Are there anyone else wanting to testify on the neutral position? Okay, Senator Hansen, would you like to close? We did have letters. We had 5 proponents, no opponents, and no one in the neutral position.
I appreciate Dennis from the Press Association being here, especially for the newer senators, to learn to, when you're speaking on the floor, to be careful about using absolutes. Because we were talking about this bill 2 years ago and the discussion around whether we should put them in newspapers. And I said, well, nobody reads the newspapers as much anyways. So after about 300 emails and pulling my foot out of my mouth, what I meant was, there's a decline in maybe the notice section on there, but I didn't include that. Now they're going more digital and with the statewide notices. I think people have access to that in just different ways. So I should have clarified that. So now I can do it on the record to make myself feel better and sleep better at night. So I'll do my best to answer some of the questions that some of you had. I am willing to work with the political subdivisions about the webpage. I think Senator Albright somebody brought up an interesting point about putting it on the county, a PDF maybe possibly, or some kind of link. So a county that is below 10,000 people or doesn't have any cities of the second class or first class can now just have a link on the county webpage that shows the PDF. Because that was one of the biggest things we heard from people. And that's the whole purpose of this bill, is where it's a kind of a collaborative effort of listening to the political subdivisions and the people and what they both really wanted and try to put them together. So not everybody got what they wanted, but we kind of did our best to at least kind of move the needle forward. And so I think one of the biggest things we heard was people who went to the meetings wanted access to the budget. Because as they're explaining it, people are like, I'm actually kind of interested in this. And they want some of them more of the minutia of the budget. And they didn't have access to it. And so even on a digital form, they can look it up on their phone as they're hearing things being explained. I think that'll be very beneficial in the educational part of this bill, which is a big part of it. They also mentioned one of the goals, yes, is to drive people to the actual budget hearings that they have before they, start when they're actually talking about this. Hopefully people will start to understand that process and maybe go to those more, because that's where a lot of the real change can occur ahead of time. The whole goal of this is to humanize property taxes. Again, some of us who have been on city council or local government, sometimes you have your budget hearings and you talk about things, and eventually it's just numbers on a sheet that the county administrator gives to you or the superintendent, and it eventually just becomes numbers and you just end up passing stuff. Yeah, at least that's how I felt. And then going to these meetings, now there are people in front of you. So these numbers now mean something, right? When you pass something, the person is now in front of you. And sometimes you're like, well, geez, maybe we shouldn't do this because there's a lot of upset people. And so this, hopefully, along with an extended timeline, might give them a chance to listen to the people and maybe make some changes in their budget if they need to do so. So putting the ball in the people's hands is kind of the goal of this bill as well. One of the biggest things I heard was the education of these hearings, was their understanding of what a levy meant and valuations. A lot of people were really surprised by that, about how the valuation of their property maybe went up 10%, but the property tax asking only went up 5% or stayed neutral. And they're like, where's the other 10% go? Where did my valuation go? What am I paying extra money for? And so I think the citizens of Nebraska get a greater understanding about how they're actually getting taxed and maybe what they can do to change it, hopefully at the budget hearing. We did improve the timeline and it could be better. I'm not going to say that, but again, it's a very complicated structure. I found out changing any kind of timeline because you're talking about a whole year and you tweak one little thing and it affects everybody down the line. And so we were able to find a reasonable solution, at least extending some of the timeline between the hearings and when they can have to send their budget into the state. I think one thing that's also going to help quite a bit is now the clerk who is running the meeting has a great understanding about how these meetings and how many people are going to show up. And I think they can maybe give some caveats beforehand saying this is not a chance for you, or this is not a property tax protest meeting. We need to kind of give some of that information beforehand because now they know what to expect. So hopefully these meetings can be run more efficiently and effectively. One of the things, and this might have to do with some of the bonding stuff too, I think the biggest impact that the postcards had information-wise and what we are trying to convey is the difference between last year and this year. So basically, the information that's on the pink postcards, and we haven't seen it, is this is how much you got taxed last year, this is how much you're getting taxed this year, and this is the difference. That difference is typically what people are going to really look at and get a greater understanding of, what's happening to their taxes. And so I think that is the biggest impact, and that's one of the things we're trying to make sure people understand. So not so much in essence the total tax that they're getting taxed, because there's some things we didn't include in here. Out of all the taxing entities, we just kept it to the top 4. So they're getting property tax, they're getting taxed in other ways, but we just left the big 4, and there's not so much the total tax, but among these 4 subdivisions, what they're changing from one year to the next. I think that is the biggest thing we want to make sure people can understand. And I do encourage all of you to attend the next pink postcard meeting in your area. You might be surprised what you hear, what you learn from your constituents. I know I did. And I do want to thank the Platt Institute, Nicole, and the AFP, Jessica there. They did help out quite a bit on getting the word out about the pink postcards. So I do appreciate that quite a bit. And lastly, also, one of the biggest things I heard was sometimes there was not an elected official present up on the stage, right? Not so much in the audience, even though a lot of people were paying attention to the audience. That was a big one. They were wondering where the assessor was at. That was a big one. But again, that may not pertain to what the meeting meant. But they were looking for elected officials in the audience, but on the stage, the people who were presenting it. So that was one of the changes we made. At least one elected official from each participating political subdivision shall attend the joint public hearing. An elected official may be the designated representative, so they can be the one giving the information out. Typically, it's the superintendent or the a county board member. But the people really wanted to see somebody up there that they elected that was listening to them. Because sometimes they just got up there and it was just, I don't know, I'd say the suits, that were up there that were giving the information. And I didn't want to say it was falling on deaf ears. I think they just felt a lot better if the person they elected that they sit next to in church was up there as well. So the information is being heard. And so that's what we're trying to do with that part of the amendment. So I think that's all of it. So I'll take any other questions if people have it.
Senator Albright?
Just one quick question. On these postcards, because the state, we have that property tax relief fund that isn't being utilized by all people who own parcels of land. Is there any way that on those postcards that somebody could put, have you collected on your parcels of ground that you have money coming back? Again, I don't know. The state hasn't, we must not do enough, and maybe we have to put it in the newspaper, online, statewide, but we have a lot of money left over, and people are looking at that money for other purposes. It's the taxpayers' money. It would just be nice if there was a way to incorporate that into what you're doing here.
That is possible. One of the things I did when I went to all these meetings myself is I got up there and I spoke. And I tried to answer some questions, but when I said, I want to make sure everybody applied for their property tax credit relief fund deduction, or not deduction, but tax credits. And some people looked around like, what the hell is that? And some people raised their hands and asked what that was and how they get more information about that. And so I was able to share that.
That's great.
And so I think that might be a way to kind of, communicate this to the public too. And I even heard some of the people up there presenting mentioning that too. And so that helped out quite a bit. So I'm hoping maybe that might also kind of get this going.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Any other questions? Would you have concern for the committee said the bonds included? The problem is they're either not included. We just need to be consistent, right?
That's the
your
thing.
situations, because I don't think it's fair to maybe some of the smaller school districts who use their building fund. I'm not a big proponent of building funds. They use their building fund, so they're going to have to include it in what they're saying. And then if you have a school that's got a bond, they don't have to include, but I think it needs to be all in.
I see where you're coming from, but like I mentioned before, I think it's not so much the total that they're getting taxed; it's the difference from one year to the next. And so I want to make sure we're consistent from both years. So I don't have the bond on one year and then not on another year.
Right, that's what I'm saying. As long as it's consistent.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from the committee? With that, and I read the letters, right?
Thank you.
No, wait a minute, I didn't read the letters.
Right.
Wait, don't leave until I read the letters. We had 5 proponents, yes, I did. 0 opponents and 0 neutral. Thank you. And with that, we'll close the hearing on LB 529. That's okay. I don't think I have a copy for mine. Oh, I do have. Oh. Cheers.
And we'll open on 322.
Yes.
Welcome, Senator Linehan.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Von Gillerin and members of the Revenue Committee. I'm Linehan, Louann, Linehan, and I am from Legislative District 39, Elkhorn and Waterloo. I'm here today to introduce LB 322. LB 322 is wonderful in its simplicity. LB 322 would eliminate the ability of joint public agencies that are created after October 1, 2023 to wield any power or authority regarding taxation. I would ask the committee to approve this bill and advance it to floor consideration of the body. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll save a question for close. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll welcome up proponent testimony.
Good afternoon, Doug Kagan, Doegkagan, representing Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom. In all fairness to Nebraska taxpayers, we urge you to support LB 322. The current statutes vote funding under specific circumstances. This statute also gives the legislature authority to repeal or amend the Joint Public Agency Act, which was originated in 1999. The objective of this original act meant to allow local government subdivisions to make the most efficient use of their fiscal resources by allowing them to cooperate with other subdivisions to provide needed services. Yet we see local governments joining forces to levy taxes without a popular vote in Lincoln, Lancaster County with the ESU 18, Randolph, Nebraska, and other local subdivisions, in some instances ignoring a popular vote. Our taxpayer group closely scrutinizes budgets, bond issues, and tax levy overrides proposed by local taxing authorities, excuse me, like cities and school districts. In the first instance, upset voters can vote out public officials. The latter two requests for additional tax dollars require a vote of the citizens and therefore allow citizens to campaign in favor of or to oppose such requests. We believe it only fair that joint public agencies may promote a tax and spend issue, but not have the authority to circumvent citizen input. In order to hold all these elected officials accountable, the authority to tax must return to the individual local subdivisions to ask for citizen approval. Please vote to advance LB 322 to the full legislature. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Kagan, for your testimony. Next proponent. Afternoon.
Good afternoon, members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Jessica Shelburne, JESSICASHELBURN. I'm the State Director of Americans for Prosperity. We're here today in support of LB 322. For those of you who haven't been on this committee for the last couple of years, one of the things that I have often said in front of this committee is that if we really truly want to rein in our property tax issue, we have to address how many entities have property taxing authority. In the state of Nebraska, we have over 20 entities that can levy a property tax. That number only grows when you have entities combining together to form a JPA that then has additional taxing authority. So with that in mind, we were thrilled to see LB 322 from Senator Linehan that would remove that ability of a JPA that is created after October 1st of this year. With that, I'd answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Ms.
Thank you.
Shelburne. Any other proponent testimony? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Von Gillern and the members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Katie Bohlmeyer, spelled KATIE-BOHLMEYER, and I am the Policy and Research Coordinator at the Lincoln Independent Business Association. LIBA represents over 1,000 small businesses primarily located in Lincoln and Lancaster County, and a significant part of our mission is to communicate the concerns of the business community to elected and appointed officials at all levels of government. Our organization was founded to give small businesses a voice with local government, a mission which we will serve today. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak for our members in the small business community. On August 28, 1999, the legislature enacted the Joint Public Agency Act. The purpose of this act was to permit local governmental units in the state to make the most efficient use of their taxing authority and other powers by enabling them to create a new agency by agreement between two or more subdivisions. A JPA has a separate board of representatives governing the agency. Joint public agencies are allowed to levy and collect property taxes, occupation taxes, enter into contracts, purchase land, build buildings, hire staff, issue debt, as well as revenue bonds. A typical Lincoln homeowner pays property taxes to a dozen government entities here in our city, yet they're unable to vote on whether they should be created. Property tax dollars are being used to pay off the remaining $8 million in bonds for construction of Lancaster Event Center, whose tax rate is 0.002753 per $100 valuation. Property tax revenue is also being used to pay off the $65 million bond issue to build a jail. Two JPAs are involved because voters did not approve bonds to do it in one package. The county tax rate is 0.007498 per $100 valuation, and the city tax rate is 0.010967 per 100 in valuation. With the massive increase of property valuations here in Lincoln, property taxes have hit staggering numbers for all of our community members. Property taxpayers, which include homeowners as well as renters, deserve the chance to vote to increase what they are required to pay. If a community decides not to vote for a bond, there should not be a separate government entity eligible to be formed just to get around this obstacle. For this reason, we support and encourage your vote on LB 322, and we thank Senator Linehan for introducing this bill. Thank you, and I will answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Bohlmeyer, for being here. Any other proponent testimony? No more proponents? Is there any opponent testimony? Seeing none. Welcome. Is this opponent testimony, or are you anticipating the new? Pardon me?
Opponent.
Opponent, thank you.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Von Gillern, distinguished members of the Revenue Committee. My name is John Cannon, Joncannon. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Association of County Officials, also known as NACO, here to testify in respectful opposition to LB 322. Senator Linehan has brought this bill, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to discuss levying authority and why we have it, why we devolve it to certain other organizations within the local government. I'll certainly defer if Lynn Rex is in the room. I've already summoned her once over the course of this year. I don't want to speak for her. She's certainly the expert on these sorts of issues. I would certainly defer to any testimony that she has, no matter what stance she has for it. But when we get to levy rates and levy limits, The one that we have for counties is constitutional. We have a 50-cent limit for counties that we wrote into the Constitution. I'm not sure that there's any other political subdivision that has that constitutional levy limit. We have a further statutory cap, and that was propagated by the authority that allows for joint public agencies. That statutory cap is essentially is in Nebraska Revised Statute Section 773442, subsection 8, where counties have that 50 cents available to them, but really it's only 45 cents. And then the additional 5 cents is for any interlocal agreement or joint public agency. When we initially adopted statutes that allow for joint public agencies, those who encourage those sorts of collaborative efforts between counties, cities, any other political subdivisions. And so I guess one of the things that I would say is that we had that authority. The people of Nebraska put that into the Constitution, that we have an authority up to 50 cents. We have statutorily limited it by another 5 cents. Frankly, if we want to remove JPAs, essentially the logical conclusion is that counties should be able to go up to the full 50 cents that they otherwise would have constitutionally. The policy was wanting to encourage those joint efforts. It's more efficient. Certainly you can have greater opportunities for partnership between local political subdivisions. If the JPA limitation was removed, the limitation that we have in 3442 subsection 8, if that were removed, we could certainly reconsider our opposition. With that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Any questions from the committee? I have one, the proposed change. Did you approach the senator regarding that proposed change, or the one that you just mentioned at the very end there?
I visited with her this morning. We didn't really have a lot of opportunity to visit in the rotunda today.
Okay.
And that's entirely my fault.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just didn't know if that was something that was, and the senator will certainly reply as to whether that's something she's interested in or not. So seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Any other opponent testimony? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senators.
Yeah.
My name is Ted Deturk, T-E-D-D-E-T-U-R-K. I'm the Administrator for Educational Service Unit Number 2 in Fremont, Nebraska, serving Burke, Cumming, Dodge, and Saunders counties. I'm here today to oppose 322. I'm fully aware the legislators oppose any kind of creative financing done by schools. This includes the joint public agency agreements. I believe most of this concern is created from the overwhelming complaints about high property taxes throughout the state. However, I also believe it's necessary for the senators to look beyond the single issue of property taxes and clearly investigate both sides of the issue. The true impact of a JPA, for example, is to work collaboratively for the betterment of all parties. To provide you with a more specific example, I'd like to outline the Pathways to Tomorrow program, or fondly we call it P2T, a program focused entirely on career and technical education programs located in West Point, Nebraska. P2T was established in 2016 with a revision grant. To sustain the program and grow it in 2017, a JPA with 8 public schools was signed. ESU 2 acts as the fiscal agent. This first JPA limited the levy to not to exceed 1 cent. What began with 1 pathway and 28 students, all in computer science, is now supporting roughly 120 students annually in 5 different pathways. We've built strong partnerships with Wayne State, Northeast Community College, and one of our parochial high schools in the area. P2T's pathways today are computer science, health science, building construction, manufacturing, which encompasses welding and CDL licensing, and education. The funding is still completed by the JPA, but our levy is now less than half a cent. All the original partners are still members, and we look to increase or expand what we have built annually. Our JPA is not a new tax. It simply shifts the levy authority from a single school district to a collective JPA. None of the schools involved could support individually one of our pathways being provided, much less 5 of them, definitely not with half a cent on their levy. I realize LB 22 indicates no new JPAs and that P2T may not be affected. However, you are also tying the hands of every other district in the state. Just 3 weeks ago, we had representatives from the State Chamber of Commerce and the Department of Education tour P2T. We had multiple conversations about how to replicate this elsewhere. That would simply be impossible without creative, flexible funding opportunities like a JPA. I'm certain some of you are thinking, why not just charge tuition for the program? I can assure you we went down that road. The problem is tuition-based programs cannot plan for the future beyond any given year. You simply will not know how many students are in the program, in which pathway, and how many instructors you're going to need. I keep hearing about these public-private partnerships. The JPA allows for successful partnerships. Please do not advance the bill from committee. I'm happy to try and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Merman.
So the Pathway to Tomorrow program, that has a building to, it's in several different school buildings, or how does that work?
It's actually a consolidated site, all in West Point, and we partner with Northeast Community College. So I think the Nielsen Foundation was the foundation that built the building, and Northeast rents it from the city, and then we rent it from Northeast.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? So I got a couple of questions. The sounds like a great program. Sounds like a creative solution, but certainly outside of the norm of pursuing bonds and having a bond election or bond vote and everything else with what would go along with a normal school bond situation. Is that why did this situation take you outside of what the school districts would have normally done if they wanted to build a building, start a new program?
So we didn't do any bonding. There's no bonding with our JPA. Our JPA pays for staff and equipment only.
Okay.
So
no capital improvements associated with that. It's all programming?
Not with our JPA, no.
Okay. And what's the budget of this JPA? Right.
Our current extra $100,000 is some grants and some other things that we've been able to work with Wayne State and Northeast.
Okay. All right.
So if the joint venture just eliminated the bonding part of it, you would still be able to do your program?
Yep. I'm different, yeah.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. Are there opponent testimony?
Afternoon. Thank you, members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Colby Coash, C-O-L-B-Y-C-O-A-S-H. I represent the Nebraska Association of School Boards. And I was happy to go following Mr. DeTurk so that you could hear the kinds of projects that we think are valuable for K-12 education, and that the CTE program that he described is exactly the kind of program that districts are trying to find partners to do with. JPA is just one way to partner, right, with other political subdivisions. So we know that schools are doing JPAs not just with community colleges, as you heard. There's also partnerships with cities. For example, I know about a JPA where a school district partner with the city in order to keep their local swimming pool open, right? It was a small community. They weren't going to be able to keep their pool open. It was something that the students wanted, the school wanted, but the city couldn't do it alone. So the JPA was the mechanism by which they could partner together and keep that pool open. Now, I don't believe there was any taxing authority within that particular JPA, but I use that as an example to share the kind of partnerships that we see that are important. The school districts are working to be as creative as they can, and I think the example from the program that was described by Mr. DeTurk is exactly the kind of partnerships that I think the state needs to continue to do more of, right? And it's a tool, and we don't want to lose this tool. We certainly understand that there are tax dollars involved, but with these JPAs, they are formed by elected officials from the JPA organizations, and we feel like they stand accountable to their taxpayers. Can't think of any offhand, but I do know of JPAs that have been disagreeable to taxpayers, and that was addressed in the very next election. And we think that's the way to address these. We would just ask that this tool remain available to districts moving forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Senator Bostrar.
Thank you, Senator Von Gillern. Thank you, Senator Koash. I mean, that's obviously the program that was highlighted previous to your testimony seems fantastic. But, you know, as you alluded to, we certainly are aware of JPAs that are created, maybe not with the express purpose, but seemingly to obfuscate unpopular spending. And it isn't always clear to the public why unpopular things are happening and money's being spent. So the idea that sort of direct democracy can fix all of those, I don't necessarily think is true. I don't necessarily think that we should get rid of this whole tool, but what else can we do to try to address where this becomes problematic?
Well, I think one of the things that I would look at is what kind of mechanisms are currently under law that relate to transparency of how these things are formed and how the public knows that political subdivision A and political subdivision B are getting together to assure that, to put together a project, whether so that the public has an opportunity to say, we think that's a good idea. We think that's a good mechanism. Elected officials have to sell those ideas to their public, just as they have to sell when a school district, for example, goes up for a bond, they've got to sell that to their public. With the JPA, I think taking a look at how the public has influence and understanding of what's happening would be something that I would advocate for before I would advocate for getting rid of the tool that they would be talking about.
Thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Senator Albright.
Thank you, Vice Chair Von Gillern. I have a quick question. Is the Beatrice, the new school down there, was that a JPA?
That was an interlocal co-op agreement.
Okay.
And that was addressed in the Education Committee. LB 299, which is working its way through the legislature right now. So it was they're similar in that it's two political subdivisions coming together, but the Beatrice example was an interlocal agreement, which is a statutorily different scheme, but with the same idea of a partnership. That there's a bill in Education 299, I believe, which is eliminating the bonding authority for them, which is sitting past general file right now.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Kosh, Mr. DeTurk clarified on the previous conversation that it was programming that was set up, not capital facilities, and therefore the bonding issue was not a unappropriate vehicle. My question, and I'm looking at multiple testimonies that we've heard here this afternoon, is that other than, and I'll use the school board, for example, if a school board enters into a JPA, other than voting out that school board member because you don't like what they did, what input do the taxpayers have on whether a JPA is created or not? And correlated to that, the taxing authority from the JPA.
Right. So first of all, if a political subdivision is going to enter in a JPA, they have to do that in open session, right? They can't just show up and say, well, you know, we had the school board president sign the JPA. That's a function of an open meeting where that political subdivision has to put it on an agenda, which has to be noticed, which can have public comment. And so that action of both political subdivisions entering into that JPA is done in an open session. And so that's the way that the public will know. That's the way that the public can weigh in.
Okay, and I understand that, and that would be the same conversation around establishing of a school budget. But the difference being that school budget is the value, total value of that school budget would have been set by the bonding authority, or not the bonding authority, the levy authority, the taxing authority that school district would have been granted by the voters, which would have been a direct input from the voters. So we still are not having a direct voice from the voters. At least I'm not seeing it.
Well, if you're talking about the budget meetings for schools are separately noticed. There's a separate budget hearing.
I understand that.
Which is separately noticed, hopefully to give the public opportunity to say, hey, this is where the budget is. I've said this in multiple hearings the last couple of years. We sure wish the public would engage in that process more. The postcard bill that we just got done talking about kind of illustrated there are people who want to engage in that, but the most effective way to engage in the budget process is those budget hearings, which it's very interesting. There were several budget hearings following the postcard meetings where the postcard meeting had dozens and dozens of people, and then the actual meeting where they voted on the budget didn't have anybody, right?
And I don't think anybody's looking for line item veto power from a member of the public on a school budget. But the members of the public do have a say in what the total school budget is through the taxing authority that's given to that school district. So I think there's a fine line difference there. You mentioned a city and a pool JPA. Where was that? Just out of curiosity.
It was a small community in central Nebraska where I don't have all the details here, but the city struggled to keep the swimming pool maintained and open under the city's budget. They were looking at closing the pool, and of course the number one user of the pool were the students and the young people in the community, and they were really worried about that. And so the city went to the school and said, can we do a JPA where the school helps maintain the pool, shares some of the cost of the maintenance of it, and then they can use it for PE and things like that. So it was this partnership where it's kind of this joint maintenance effort and ownership. I don't know if it's ownership, but of the pool, which resulted in keeping the pool open, which is what the community wanted.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Cobb.
Thank you.
Any other opponent testimony?
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Chris Connolly, CHRIS, CONNOLLY. I am the Chief Assistant City Attorney for the City of Lincoln. I'm here to speak in opposition to LB 322 on behalf of the city, but I am also authorized to speak on behalf of the county in opposition to LB 322 today. I have spent much of my 14 years with the city working with the West Haymarket Joint Public Agency that owns Pinnacle Bank Arena. It's been a very successful partnership between the City of Lincoln and the University of Nebraska. The countless shows, basketball games, and other events have provided great entertainment for the people of the state of Nebraska, and in doing so has generated millions of dollars in tax revenues for the City of Lincoln, Lancaster County, and the state of Nebraska. This success story would not have worked nearly as efficiently without a joint public agency. JPAs can provide the needed governance structure, financing capabilities, and accountability needed for large capital projects. By having multiple agency partners in a JPA, the public is well served by the cooperative nature of the agency and the oversight that each partnering agency brings to the organization. We have seen this at the West Haymarket Joint Public Agency. Interlocals are good and valuable tools also, but the formalities and the automatic creation of a separate political subdivision makes a better functioning entity with more transparency and accountability. To be clear, we recognize this bill does not affect the West Haymarket Joint Public Agency. However, this kind of a structure could be very effective for future large capital projects for the city and the rest of the state. If there is no ability to provide funding for bonds or other financing needed for such large projects, there may be no benefit to agencies in cooperating on any given project. JPAs are designed to promote the joint cooperation of state and local government agencies to effectively and efficiently use taxpayer dollars. Indeed, a best practice for governments is to create and maintain diversity of revenue sources, and this bill would eliminate this valuable tool. Cities, counties, and even the state would have to find other mechanisms instead of working jointly for the benefit of the taxpayers. While interlocals can work, we believe JPAs are more streamlined and remain a valuable tool for joint cooperation. With the changes that were made in 2015, any efforts to issue general obligation bonds will require a vote of the taxpayers. Thus, there is direct authorization from the taxpayers. This bill would remove the ability of the taxpayer to permit such financing. JPAs have no independent taxing authority. They can only use the levy allocation pledged by a member, and that levy allocation cannot happen without approval of the taxpayers through an election. Local taxpayers should be permitted to express their support or opposition to such projects. For these reasons, we respectfully oppose LB 322 and ask that it not advance to general file. Thank you for your time today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Senator Albright.
Sorry, quick question. Thank you, Senator Von Gillerin, and thank you for being here. You say that you're also representing the county.
Correct.
And how was the Lancaster Event Center financed? Do you know?
Well, they work with the Agricultural Society, I believe.
Okay.
I'm not familiar
That was
with the
not
funding
considered a
mechanism for that.
JPA?
That is not a JPA.
Okay. I mean, I guess my biggest concern is when things go to the vote of the people and the people say no and they do it anyway.
Well, I don't know how that can happen under the way it's structured.
Okay. If a JPA is like that, that's great. I remember memorandums of understanding. Would you say that that's a JPA, somewhat like that?
A memorandum of understanding? No, a JPA is it's defined in the statute as to how it gets organized. I
Okay,
mean, there's
so-
specific steps.
But like when we talk about the West Point project that they have with the university or the Northeast Community College and Wayne State College and some of the schools and the city. And
It could be an interlocal cooperation.
but you're saying
And
though that to get authorization to do all of these things, that it should go to the vote of the people?
Well, what I'm talking about specifically is with regard to bonding. I mean, any joint public agency still has to be formed through the steps that are called for in the statute, and that requires votes of the boards. And so what I'm referring to with regard to the vote of the people is really the bonding ability. And since bonds would have to be approved by the taxpayers before they could be issued, this bill would eliminate that possibility. And so we're asking that JPAs, if they're properly formed, then they should still be able to issue bonds if presented to the people for a vote.
And you probably know more about the JPA than I do, but who's the authority that oversees whether everyone that's in that JPA that it's working properly?
Well, for the West Haymarket Joint Public Agency, the way it was formed was to have a board of representatives. And so there are 3 members on that board right now.
Okay.
And they oversee the activities. There are no employees for the West Haymarket Joint Public Agency. City employees such as myself fulfill the roles that the JPA may need in various kinds of services.
Very good. Thank you.
Other questions, Senator Dungan?
Thank you, Vice Chair Von Gilman. Thank you for being here. So you're currently a part of the West Haymarket JPA?
I am not a member of it. As a Chief Assistant City Attorney, I assist the board members and the board in any legal activities that they may have.
And I'm just not very familiar with the West Haymarket JPA. Can you, I guess, go into a little more detail about what exactly they've done for Lincoln or what kind of things they've done for the community here?
The West Haymarket JPA was formed in 2010 primarily to facilitate building of Pinnacle Bank Arena. But in the process, it also acquired everything that was in the Burlington Northern Rail Yard, which is now the West Haymarket area of Lincoln. It has sold off most of those properties and has generated revenues from that to help pay off the bonds along with occupation taxes. So its primary function at this point is to sell off its remaining properties that it has for sale for development and to operate Pinnacle Bank Arena. It is the owner of Pinnacle Bank Arena. Now, it does not directly operate Pinnacle Bank Arena. That's an arrangement with the city through contracts that were necessary in order to satisfy the underwriters in getting the bonds issued to build the building. But it is the owner of Pinnacle Bank Arena.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. Other opposition testimony? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator Von Gillen, members of the committee. My name is Lynn Rex, Lynnrex, representing the League of Nebraska Municipalities. We're here today respectfully opposing this particular measure, and I do understand frustrations with some of the statutes, but just to underscore the point that Chris Donnelly just made, in 2015 with passage of LE 132, 13-27, 13-2507 was amended to include 4A, and this was a bill by Senator Epke at the time, prior to the issuance of bonds and the pledge of property tax levy authority allocated to a joint public agency to pay the principal of and interest on bonds to be issued by the joint public agency. The joint public agency shall hold an election to present the question of issuing such bonds and levying such tax to the registered voters of the participating public agency, which allocates its property tax levy authority, and it goes on and on. So basically, you have to have approval for that. That passed basically in 2015, again with LB 132. One of the things that I can share with you is that when the levy limits were put in place in 1996 with passage of LB 1114, passed 1996, taking effect in 1998, that basically Senator Warner, who was then chair of this committee, said he's going to do everything he can to incent cooperation. If you can go together, for example, a city and a school and have one library instead of each having your own, or do something else together, to do it that way. So they really incentivized interlocal agreements by saying that municipalities would have the maximum levy authority of 45 cents per $100 evaluation, plus 5 cents with an interlocal agreement. As John Cannon indicated, they're the only political subdivision with a constitutional levy limit of 50 cents. So the way that this committee handled that was to say, counties, you have 50 cents minus 5 cents. And that 5 cents has to be used for an interlocal agreement. The point being, work together. If everybody doesn't have to build their own library, don't do it. Work together. I think one of the best examples of a JPA was in the little village of Exeter, and the school district worked together with a JPA and built a school, which is used during the day for the school kids and everything else that they need to do, and at night by seniors and others for an exercise type. For a little community like that, it's a big deal to have a facility like that. So there are those types of examples. But I just want to underscore too, I understand the frustration with property taxes. I understand that. I understand the great work that this committee has done in that as well. But I just want to underscore that this does not let you increase as a political subdivision what your levy authority is. So as I indicated before, I've been saying we have 529 cities and villages. Sadly, I was informed by my staff yesterday, there's only 528 now. So 528 cities and villages in the state of Nebraska, half of them up against the maximum levy authority, half of them can't even raise the money to spend the unrestricted funds that you give them in 13-519, which is 2.5% over the prior year, plus 1% with the supermajority vote. So again, a JPA does not let you just piggyback on it and have more levy authority. It does not let you spend above what your lit unrestricted funds would be in 13-519 and 13-520. So you have this limitation no matter what. This is a way in which they can facilitate and work together. And I do agree with what Chris Donnelly was telling you, which is that it has a lot of transparency built into it. These are not just some folks that get together to decide, let's just issue some bonds. There's a board. They're under the Open Meetings Act. They're under the Public Records Law. In terms of how they're handled, they're audited. There are all kinds of requirements with this. Now, yes, the Interlocal Cooperation Act is also there as an opportunity for political bodies to partner together. But I would just underscore the fact that this has been a very valuable tool. And so I hope that you don't advance this bill. I do respect tremendously Senator Linehan and the work that she's done with property taxes. We just strongly encourage you not to advance this bill. And we're happy to work with this committee if there's something we need to do to tighten up JPAs. If there's needs to be more accountability, we're open to that. I just think there's maximum accountability with JPAs. And those are in the other statutes that you don't have before you. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? I just have one. Which town or village did you lose?
Preston.
Prescott?
Preston.
Preston.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very sad.
Sorry.
Unincorporated.
Sorry for your loss.
I had the same question.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thanks very
Ms.
much. And again, sorry that I didn't have an opportunity to talk to you beforehand. So
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Any other opposition testimony? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in the neutral position? Seeing none, Senator Linehan, would you like to close?
So I am glad they have to have a vote of the people if they bond. But here, they said it was passed, and I didn't know Senator Warner, so I'm all for efficiency. But nobody came up here and explained how they were being efficient. The project in West Point, I'm sure it's a wonderful project, but if their budget is for just that part of their education is $430,000, and they've got 120 students, that's $3,588 per student, and they're already in high school, which means the high school is getting at least $10,000 a student. And they've also got the community college involved, which is also getting property taxes and state funding. So great programs. Where is, when a high school junior or senior is spending most of their time in community college, and where's the savings in the school? These are the things that I don't understand. I'm worried, Lincoln wants a convention center. I don't want the University of Nebraska building Lincoln a convention center. I understand the Pinnacle Bank because the university uses it, but I'm sure the university would like to have a convention center too. You're right, the same situation, Albright, same situation in Beatrice, where you were at that hearing. I think you all were. I can't remember. I'm confused between revenue and education, but they had 2 bond elections. They lost both of them by significant margins and went ahead and did it anyway. I think this was in education, but maybe it was here. We had people, the hearing where there were like 5 or 6 people from Norfolk that drove down here to testify because the city couldn't afford to put. They've started sports now at Northeast Community College. So now they have a baseball team. So now they have to have a softball team, Title IX, I understand that. But now they don't have a softball field, so they're going to use the city softball field, but they're going to go together, and a community college and a high school are going to build a sports complex on the softball field. And that too was it was a city election to raise their sales tax by 0.5%. The election failed, and now the community college and the school are going to do it anyway. I don't know. I want people to be efficient and work together. I don't want workarounds of vote of the people. And that, another example used, it's great to keep a city swimming pool open, but it's not okay to use school funding to do it. It's just not okay. We're about to give, this session goes this way, our new governor plans it to go, we're about to commit another $1 billion to public education. We want to building city swimming pools. I just think it's something we need to look at. We have a lot to do this year. I don't know if we get done with this year. I'm happy to work with anybody on this, but we need some strings around this, or we're going to have what we heard. We're going to have swimming pools and all kinds of other things going on that shouldn't be going on.
Any questions from the committee? I just have one. We've talked about, there's really been two different conversations that we've had around this from both proponents and opponents. And that is, one is programmatic and the other is capital expenditures. What are you more, is your bill directed more at one or the other, or particular projects going forward? What is it that you're most
Capital
concerned about?
expenditures are my biggest concern.
Okay.
Because you're putting people in debt with bonds. And the reason we have votes on that is because people are going into debt and they're committing for 20 years to pay off a note, just like your mortgage. It becomes part of your mortgage, right? So I think we're going to do that. I actually think it's a little concerning that it's only 50% vote that can put all 100% of people in debt, but that is what it is. Another thing is, and I don't know, the JPAs, the way I understand it, and maybe I'm wrong on this, I would like some clarification. I think anybody who serves on a JPA board ought to be elected somewhere.
Yeah.
They at least ought to be a city official or they should be, whoever's on that board, they all need to be elected. And I know, and I don't know how this is even set up, I haven't dug that deep, but with the streetcar authority in Omaha, we have a person that the Omaha, and I like the Omaha Chamber, but I don't think they ought to be appointing people to boards. I think board members should be elected. So I just think we have kind of a lot of creative accountants and attorneys. And this, I think the JPA was passed for a big project, Pinnacle Bank Arena. And now it's keeping swimming pools open. We just need some tightening up.
Very good. Any other questions? Seeing none, we have letters. We have 5 proponent and 2 opponent letters and 0 neutral.
Oh, really? Okay.
So we will conclude the testimony on 322 and conclude the revenue hearing for the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.